Part 81. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 802. After leaving the capital, under the protection of the left and right golden feather guards, a team stretching for several miles walked slowly on the official road. The bumpy official road had been filled and compacted with lois by officials from the Ministry of Works a few days ago. If the emperor sprained his ankle and fell on the way to the ceremony because of a pothole, the Minister of Works and the Vice Minister would have finished their work. At their current speed, they could probably reach the altar around noon. Tang Ning looked at the crowd walking slowly behind him and lamented that it was fortunate that it was winter instead of summer, otherwise some people would die on the road before reaching the West Mountain. Although it was a bit cold when I got up in the morning, I didn't feel cold as I walked. It was naturally impossible for this team of hundreds or thousands of people to keep it in order all the way. Although there were ceremonial officials patrolling along the way, they turned a blind eye to most of the situations. Zhang Dexioshi was exempted from participating in the ceremony due to physical reasons, but Wang Xiang, as the Prime Minister, had to attend. Tang Ning fell behind a few steps, looked at Wang Xiang who was walking in front of the civil servants, and asked, "How do you feel, Wang Xiang?" Although he had walked for more than a few miles, Wang Xiang was still calm and said, "Thank you for your concern, Lord Tang. My legs and feet are still quite agile. I can walk and climb mountains without any problem." The elderly officials in the court were all in good health. Although Wang Xiang was old, he seemed to be more energetic than the young officials behind him. Tang Ning looked back and saw that some young officials had sweat on their foreheads and looked pale. He walked beside Wang Xiang and whispered, "At the ceremony later, Wang Xiang should be more careful and protect himself." Wang Xiang raised his eyebrows and asked, "What do you mean?" Tang Ning did not speak, but just looked up and looked ahead. Wang Xiang looked over and finally stopped at King Kong. He was silent for a while and asked, "How sure are you?" Tang Ning said, "Prevent it before it happens." Prime Minister Wang thought for a long time, looked at him, and said solemnly, "Your Majesty must not make any mistakes." Tang Ning said, "Do your best." It took them an hour to reach the foot of the West Mountain. It would take another hour to climb the mountain. At this time, the team became more scattered. Everyone supported each other to climb. The ceremonial officer in the crowd was also exhausted and did not blame this behavior. It's not a big deal now, but when they get to the altar on the top of the mountain, no matter whether they are royal children or powerful officials, they are not allowed to make noise, cough, or spit. Before that, the first thing to ensure is that they can climb up. The East Gate guards escorted them to the bottom of the mountain, and they could not go up the mountain. The mountain road could not accommodate so many people. On both sides were the soldiers of the right West Gate guards. Emperor Chen walked in the front. Even though his legs were a little sore, he looked up at the top of the mountain with a hint of excitement. For the emperor, nothing could be more exciting than to have achieved something that he could boast about in front of his ancestors, and then to publicize it again in front of all the civil and military officials and dignitaries in the capital at the festival. This festival was enough to be recorded in the history books and make him famous for eternity. Thinking of this, the slight soreness in his legs seemed to disappear in an instant. Emperor Chen, who was immersed in excitement and unable to extricate himself, naturally did not notice that not far behind him, King Kong looked up at the top of the mountain, and the excitement and enthusiasm on his face were even greater than his. With Tang Ning's current body, even if the West Mountain was twice as high, it would not be a difficult task for him. But it was different for the others. When they climbed to the last distance, including Emperor Chen, everyone stopped on the steps to rest. This was their last rest time. Once they stepped onto the top of the mountain, everyone had to abide by the etiquette and regulations of the festival until the end of the festival. The ceremony was divided into several steps, including welcoming the gods, laying down silk, offering gifts, etc., removing food, sending off the gods, etc. The process was lengthy and the etiquette was complicated. There were music and dances in each sacrificial link, which were strictly stipulated in etiquette, and each step was led by Emperor Chen and assisted by the royal family. This was much easier for the rest of the people. They only needed to stand in place, kowtow from time to time, stand up, and kowtow again. The first procedure of the ceremony was that Emperor Chen went to the gods and ancestors to burn incense and kowtow, which was called welcoming the gods. The ceremony was accompanied by music, which sounded very solemn. Everyone held their breath and concentrated, not daring to make any noise. Between the music, there was only the mountain breeze and the occasional bird calls. After laying down silk, Wang Xiang read the sacrificial text. This sacrificial text was very long and obviously had a fixed format. Even Tang Ning found the first few paragraphs a bit obscure. The content later was somewhat easy to understand. The general meaning is that during the years when Emperor Chen was in power, he rectified the court, kept the country safe and secure, and the people lived and worked in peace and contentment, with surplus food every year and a full treasury, etc., etc. It was obviously a very honorable thing to brag about one's achievements in front of the gods and ancestors. Seeing Emperor Chen's red face and overjoyed look, Tang Ning understood why he insisted on holding the ceremony in the West Mountain. He looked at King Kong and saw that King Kong just lowered his head and stood in his position, so he knew that he had not waited for a good time to take action. The ceremony had many procedures and complicated procedures, and it would take more than 2 hours to end. During this time, 1,000 soldiers of the Right West Gate Guards guarded outside the altar, and the rest were distributed on the mountain road and various places in the West Mountain to be responsible for vigilance. Back Mountain. A captain led 100 men and stood outside a dense forest. He asked in doubt, "What's going on? It's been a night. Why haven't they come back yet?" One man looked ahead and said, "It's dark at night. Did they fall off the cliff?" The captain looked at him, pointed at a few people, and said, "You guys, go to the forest over there and take a look." More than 10 people heard this and walked towards the dense forest beside the cliff. The captain's eyes flashed with excitement. He looked back at the direction of the altar and murmured, "Success or failure depends on this move. Life or death, it's today." The group waited outside the forest for a long time, but no one came out of the forest. A trace of vigilance appeared on his face. He stretched out his hand to signal behind him and slowly approached the direction of the woods. On the altar. Suddenly, a noisy bird call came from the sky in front. Tang Ning raised his head and saw a group of flying birds startled from the forest behind the mountain and flew over their heads. At this time, the ceremony had already reached the stage of offering gifts. This process required the royal family, including Emperor Chen, to perform the 3 kneeling and 9 bowing ceremony. Women were not allowed to participate in the ceremony, so Queen Mother Zhaoman and the concubines in the palace did not come. Only Emperor Chen, Prince Fu, Prince Duan, Prince Kong, and Prince Run were qualified to perform this ceremony. After Emperor Chen took his seat, he looked up when he saw that the ceremonial officer had not spoken for a long time. The ceremonial officer was about to announce the start of the offering ceremony, but saw that everyone was in place, except Prince Kong, who was still standing at the edge of the altar. He whispered, "Your Highness Prince Kong, hurry up." Prince Kong just smiled at him, with a smile on his lips. Emperor Chen turned his head, looked at Prince Kong, frowned and said, "Why are you still standing there? Hurry up and take your place." "What for?" Prince Kong looked at him, smiled slightly, took 2 steps back, stood behind a team of guards, and asked with a smile, "Of course it's a rebellion, didn't he father see it?" Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 803. Emperor Chen looked at King Kong, his face showing extreme shock, blurting out, "What did you say?" At this moment, he suspected that he had hallucinations. King Kong was his son, How could he rebel? How dare he rebel? I said, I want to rebel. King Kong exhaled and repeated, feeling more relaxed than ever before. Since he was stripped of his princely title and treated unfairly by his father, he has never been as relaxed as he is now. At this moment, all the injustice and humiliation he had suffered seemed to go away with the mountain wind. He looked forward, waved to the people behind him, and said, "Take them all down." Emperor Chen was shocked and angry, and shouted, "How dare you!" In response to him, the spears and swords of the soldiers of the right West Gate guards. Emperor Chen trembled, stepped back a few steps, his face turned pale, and he protected Zhao Yuan behind him. Prince Duan was even more pale, and said in a broken voice, "Zhao Cheng, what are you doing?" Prince Kong looked at him, smiled evilly, and said, "Rebellion, can't you see it, you pig?" Emperor Chen looked at him and said sternly, "You rebellious son. This is what my father taught me." Prince Kong looked at him and said, "You can't rely on others to give you what you want, you have to get it yourself. I want the throne now, I'm here to get it." Prince Fu stood beside Emperor Chen, looking vaguely in another direction. In that direction, a figure had already moved towards the side. Inside the altar, the situation suddenly changed. Civil and military officials, dignitaries in the capital knelt on the ground, staring at the situation in front of the altar in a daze. None of them expected that such a change would occur in the solemn royal ceremony. The offering procedure that was supposed to be carried out was interrupted, and King Kong inexplicably retreated outside the altar. Dozens of soldiers of the right West Gate guards around the altar pointed their weapons at His Majesty and several royal family members. In just a moment, they understood what had happened in front of them. King Kong wanted to rebel. A great uproar immediately broke out in the crowd. King Kong actually chose to unite with the right West Gate guards to rebel during the sacrifice to heaven. This is Zishan. His Majesty and the civil and military officials of the court, as well as the dignitaries in the capital, are all on the mountain. The right West Gate guards who were originally responsible for everyone's safety have become rebels. Everyone on the mountain is isolated and helpless. Isn't it at their mercy? At that time, he will threaten His Majesty with his life and force His Majesty to abdicate. In a short period of time, everyone figured out the key point of the matter. They began to turn pale and slump to the ground, with extremely terrified faces. This is a coup, a long-planned coup. His Majesty cancelled the guard qualification of the left West Gate Guard, but he did not expect that the right West Gate Guard would also fall into the hands of King Kong. In this way, His Majesty brought important officials and dignitaries from the court to offer sacrifices to the heaven, which was simply a trap and a road to death. With the order of King Kong, the right West Gate guards around the altar began to move. They raised their weapons, surrounded the altar, and continued to advance forward. The crowd was in chaos. At this time, no one cared about the sacrificial ceremony. They desperately squeezed into the middle. Tang Ning's attention was always on King Kong. After noticing his movements, he flashed and came to the position of Emperor Chen and King Run. At the same time, he took out a bamboo tube from his sleeve, pulled out the plug at the end, and a ray of light shot straight into the sky from the bamboo tube, exploded in the sky, and made a deafening sound. This was the signal he and Xiao Ju agreed on. With the speed of the left guard, it would take less than half an hour to get here from the back mountain. The 100 shadow guards following Emperor Chen had quickly surrounded them and formed a circle, with their weapons pointed outward. However, these 100 people seemed pitifully few compared to the countless right West Gate guards who surrounded the altar. King Kong noticed Tang Ning's actions, stood in the crowd, and asked with a smile, "Is it too late?" "Your Majesty, the soldiers in the cavalry battalion are nearby. I have already sent a signal, and they will come soon," Tang Ning whispered to Emperor Chen, then looked at King Kong and said in a deep voice, "King Kong, you dare to rebel." King Kong obviously didn't want to waste time, and did not answer Tang Ning's words. He waved his hand and said, "Take them all down. If there is resistance, kill them without mercy." The shadow guards looked solemn and tried their best to stop the right west gate guards from approaching. At a certain forest in the back of the West Mountain, after seeing the signal in the sky, a group of figures ran out of the forest and flew towards the direction of the altar. At the same time, under the West Mountain, Wu Lihao was watching the flares exploding in the sky, and was about to order everyone to go up the mountain, when a black line suddenly appeared in front of him. He looked solemnly at the guards of the left west gate who were blocking their way, and asked, "Zhangzhao, what do you want to do?" A man in armor rode on a horse and shouted, "Your Majesty is offering sacrifices to the heaven with important officials in the court. I want to ask, what do you Jinyue want to do, rebellion?" As the personal guards trained by Gong Sun Ying to help Emperor Chen, the shadow guards still have some skills. They are not good at using gu, but everyone is proficient in poison techniques. Everyone took out a porcelain bottle from their arms, smashed it, and immediately a burst of yellow smoke rose on the spot. Tang Ning, Emperor Chen, and others were all given a piece of wet cloth, which could resist the poisonous smoke by covering their mouths and noses. The guards at the right west gate were caught off guard, and immediately about 100 of them covered their mouths and noses, dropped their weapons, and fell to the ground. But the rest of them actually took out wet cloth from their arms, covered their mouths and noses, and chopped with one hand holding the weapon. These people obviously had some defense against the shadow guards. After the first wave of attacks, they were no longer effective. King Kong stood outside the crowd and smiled. Mr. Su's preparations really worked. King Kong was still dispatching people. People kept pouring in from outside the altar. More than 1,000 soldiers of the right west gate were approaching the front. Although the shadow guards were stronger, they were far less numerous than them. After the first wave of attacks, they gradually retreated inside until they could no longer retreat. At this time, there were less than 10 guards who could still stand in front of Tang Ning and Emperor Chen. The rest were captured by the rebels. And around them were densely packed soldiers of the right west gate, who had surrounded them. King Kong saw that Emperor Chen was doomed, so he waved his hand and everyone stopped. King Kong walked to the front, keeping a distance of 2 feet from Emperor Chen, and said with a smile, "How is it, father, how do you feel?" Emperor Chen's face was as gloomy as water, and he gritted his teeth and said, "You rebellious son, how dare you rebel, how can you face the ancestors after you die?" Kong looked at him, shook his head and said, "Anyone can say this, except father." Emperor Chen looked at him and said angrily, "Rebellious son, what are you talking about? Don't think I don't know, you also killed your brother and father, and killed all your brothers to sit on the throne." King Kong looked at him and said, "I'm just learning from father." Emperor Chen's face muscles trembled, hissing he said, "Son of rebellion, shut up. Why, you've done this, are you afraid of what others say?" King Kong looked at him and said, "Even my father is not afraid of being embarrassed to face our ancestors, so what should I be afraid of?" A smile appeared on his face, and he said, "I only care about my life. Even if I die and go to the 18th level of hell, my father will accompany me. What should I be afraid of?" Prince Duan squeezed out from the back, knelt on the ground, and shouted, "Don't kill me, don't kill me, the throne is yours, don't kill me." King Kong looked down at him and shook his head, saying, "Do you know that you are like a dog now?" Luan mobile version website. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 804. If he was scolded by King Kong as a beast after an unusual incident, King Duan would definitely fight back. But now and then, King Kong and the rebels have surrounded them, and disobeying his orders will lead to death. King Duan turned around and looked around. He saw the weapons of the rebels shining brightly and his face became even paler. He looked at King Kong and immediately said, "I am a dog, I am a dog. Just treat me as a dog and spare me." Emperor Chen couldn't hide the disappointment in his eyes as he gritted his teeth and said, "Stand up for me, your backbone is missing." Prince Duan ignored Emperor Chen, looked at Prince Kong, and said tremblingly, "Brother, please don't kill me." King Kong looked at him, twitched the corner of his mouth and said, "Don't you know that you look more like a dog like this?" Woof woof woof. King Duan barked at him a few times and laughed dryly, "Isn't this more like it? Ha ha ha." King Kong looked at him and couldn't help but laugh to the sky. "Is this the prince you chose?" After laughing, he looked at Prince Duan again, looked at Emperor Chen, and asked sarcastically, "What is it about me that is inferior to him? Is it because the Tang family helped you do it, more disgusting things?" Emperor Chen looked at him, shook his head, and said, "I never thought that my son would become like this." King Kong looked at him and asked, "Are you not forcing me to become like this?" Emperor Chen's eyes were slightly sharp and he asked, "How did I force you?" King Kong looked at him, his expression suddenly turned fierce, he pointed at King Duan and said loudly, "If you could treat me fairly, even if you weren't so biased towards this pig, you wouldn't be here today. Growing up, your favorite is Zhao Ming. You give him all the good things. Have you ever thought about how I feel?" King Kong looked at him and asked, "I just want to ask my father, do you have any, even thought about it once, passing the throne to me?" Emperor Chen looked at him and said, "I will give you one more chance to let them put down their weapons, and I can spare their lives." "You think you are still that arrogant emperor?" Hearing this, King Kong suddenly became furious. The veins on his forehead trembled. He pointed at Emperor Chen and said sternly, "What I hate the most is your arrogant look. Do you think you are the emperor? Do you think that the achievements you just praised are your own? Those achievements were all made by people named Tang. You still have the nerve to worship heaven and show off. Are you still shameless?" Huang Chen's face was as dark as the bottom of a pot. He looked at Tang Ning and asked, "What are you waiting for?" Tang Ning glanced at King Kong with a complicated expression and said, "Here we come." As he finished speaking, the altar under his feet suddenly shook. The amplitude of the vibration was very small. If you look around, you will find that it is not the altar that is shaking, but the surrounding land. Figures are pouring out from the front. The person rushing at the front is Xiao Ju. King Kong looked back, his expression changed drastically, and he loudly said, "Capture the emperor first." As soon as he finished speaking, someone knocked him down on his butt. His whole body was kicked away and he fell at the feet of Emperor Chen. Several soldiers behind King Kong quickly ran forward and held King Kong firmly. The leader knelt down on one knee, clasped his fists and said, "Zhonglang General Chenzhou, Zhou Xiao Ei, see your majesty, see the general." Tang Ning saw Chenzhou just now. He must have sneaked in last night, so even if he was surrounded by Yuximan guards, he didn't panic at all. Even if King Kong goes crazy and wants to kill Emperor Chen immediately, nothing will happen to him. After all, old Zheng is not far away, and he is wearing soft armor, and ordinary swords cannot cut him. King Kong was captured, and more than twice the number of troops surrounded him. The less than 1,000 Yuximan guards suddenly panicked and looked around, not knowing how to deal with it. Tang Ning looked at Emperor Chen, exchanged glances with him, stepped forward, and said loudly, "Your Majesty has ordered that anyone who puts down his weapon now will be exempted from death penalty. I will count to 3, and those who stubbornly resist will be killed without mercy." When the right gate guards looked at each other, there was already a sound echoing in the altar. 1. 2. When Tang Ning shouted 2, there was a ping ping pong pong sound in her ears. King Kong had been captured. They were leaderless. When they heard that they would be exempted from the death penalty, They had no time to think. They all put down their weapons and knelt on the ground. Xiaoju waved his hand, and Zhou Xiaoyi rushed forward and restrained all these people. Xiaoju strode forward, knelt down on one knee, and said loudly, "I am late to save you, Your Majesty, please punish me." "Get up." Chen Huang waved his hand, then glanced at King Kong and said, "Bring him in." After that, he walked towards the palace in front of the altar without looking back. The crisis had been resolved. King Duan got up from the ground, kicked King Kong hard, and said angrily, "You still dare to rebel?" He kicked vigorously, and while kicking, he said, "You say I am a dog, you say I am a pig, look at what you look like now, you are the pig, your whole family is a pig, and they are not as good as pigs or dogs." King Kong lowered his head, said nothing, and allowed King Duan to punch and kick him. His eyes were unfocused and lifeless. Tang Ning waved her hand, and someone dragged King Duan away. King Kong finally raised his head, looked at Tang Ning, and asked, "How did you know?" Tang Ning looked at him and said, "I guess." "You are still you." King Kong breathed a sigh of relief, stood up, patted the dust on his body, looked at him, and said in admiration, "That's a really accurate guess." After saying that, he straightened his clothes, raised his head, and walked towards the palace ahead. Zhao Yuan stood beside Tang Ning, his face pale. He looked up at Tang Ning and asked, "Sir, does my brother want to kill my father and us?" "It's okay." Tang Ning touched his head and said, "Go to sleep, it will be fine after a sleep." Prince Fu glanced at Tang Ning, walked to the front, and comforted the officials and dignitaries who were frightened by the previous incident. He handed Zhao Yuan, who had fallen asleep, to Chen Zhou to take care of. Looking at the mess around him, he sighed, walked out of the altar, and walked to the edge of a cliff. The bloody smell in the air faded a little. From here, you can faintly see the shouting and killing at the foot of the mountain. After the signal flare from the West Mountain is released, it means that something went wrong at the ceremony. At that time, the imperial guards of the capital, except for a group of Yulin guards, will all gather at the foot of the West Mountain. Even if the left and right West Gate guards rebel, they will be subdued in a short time. In the altar, many officials and dignitaries finally resolved the crisis and gathered in an open space on the side. They were still shocked and looked at the altar and the palace behind them from time to time, whispering. The court was well prepared for the ceremony, but no one expected that King Kong would rebel at the ceremony. This made the ceremony easier to remember than any other time. People remembered not the achievements that His Majesty wanted to publicize at the ceremony, but that King Kong rebelled with the imperial guards at the ceremony. Although the rebellion was not successful, it must be a major event that His Majesty could not avoid during his reign in the history books. The people in the capital had no way of knowing what happened on the West Mountain. It was just that many people were startled by the loud noise from the west, and then they continued to do their own things and put the matter behind them. Only a moment later, the imperial guards pouring out of the palace once again broke the tranquility of the capital. Looking at the Yulin guards who hurried out of the capital, it was not until this moment that someone realized that something extraordinary seemed to have happened outside. In the palace of King Huai. King Huai stood under the tree, looking towards the west, and stood there for a long time. Warm reminder, if you find that clicking the next page will force you to jump to other websites, please use the chapter error or contact us at the bottom to inform us, we will handle it as soon as possible. Thank you for your understanding. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 805. On the West Mountain. The rebellion of King Kong has calmed down, and the left guard is counting the casualties. If the two armies are evenly matched, both sides will suffer heavy casualties. But because the difference in the number of shadow guards and right West Gate guards is too large, they almost collapsed at the first blow, so there are not too many casualties. Most of them were just captured alive. As for the left West Gate guards below, After hearing that King Kong had failed, they were surrounded by the imperial guards who came and put down their weapons. The generals of the guards were all captured by Wu Lihao. This rebellion lasted for a short time and has been completely quelled. Tang Ning looked at Chen Zhou, who was walking over, and praised him. Well done. Chen Zhou said embarrassedly, it's all because of your foresight. Chen Zhou and Xiao Ju played a great role in this incident, and they will be rewarded afterwards. Tang Ning looked at the palace in front of him. The sky above the palace was blue and clear. Today was a rare good day in winter, but in Tang Ning's eyes, the blue sky was covered with a thick layer of blood. In the palace, Emperor Chen stood with his hands behind his back, his face calm and his expression unclear. King Kong sat cross-legged on the ground, with his head down, wondering what he was thinking. After an unknown amount of time, Emperor Chen finally turned his head and asked, "Why?" King Kong raised his head and asked self-deprecatingly, "Do I have a choice?" Emperor Chen knew the deep meaning of his words. In fact, if he were King Kong, he would definitely make the same choice as him, or even more extreme than him. Emperor Chen looked at him and asked, "Did you do that assassination yourself?" At this point, King Kong no longer concealed it and nodded, "It was me." Emperor Chen was silent for a moment and asked, "How do you want me to deal with you?" King Kong remembered what Mr. Su told him yesterday, but still shook his head and said, "Father, you should kill me. Remember to move quickly. I heard that if you swing the knife quickly enough, people will not feel pain." Emperor Chen pulled out a knife from the waist of a guard, looked up, and said, "I haven't touched a knife for many years." King Kong lowered his head, neither dodging nor evading. When Emperor Chen came out, he sighed and said, "If there is a next life, I don't want to be your son." Emperor Chen looked at him and asked, "Don't you regret it?" King Kong said, "If I say I regret it, will you let me go?" Emperor Chen nodded and said, "Yes." King Kong looked into his eyes for a long time before shaking his head and saying, "Forget it. Life is meaningless. It's better to die." "As you wish." Emperor Chen said lightly, raised the long sword in his hand, and swung it down with force. Clang! The blade hit the ground, sparks flew, and from beginning to end, King Kong's stretched head did not retract. Emperor Chen threw the knife on the ground, his expression dejected, and said, "I am a failed father and a failed emperor." No, King Kong shook his head and said, "You are just a failed father. As an emperor, no previous emperor can compare to you." Emperor Chen turned around, without looking at King Kong again, and said, "Take him away, and summon Tang Ning in." When Tang Ning entered the palace, he passed by King Kong. Although King Kong rebelled, even if he was a prince, he could not escape the death penalty, but it seemed that Emperor Chen did not want to kill him. Come to think of it, even a tiger will not eat its own cubs. Tang Ning has seen people who killed their brothers and fathers, but he has never met anyone who killed his son. Emperor Chen turned his back to him and asked, "When did you know that Prince Kong was going to rebel?" Tang Ning said, "Last night." Emperor Chen asked, "Why didn't you report it to me?" Tang Ning said, "Your Majesty, the bodies of those who said that the Zhang family was going to rebel a few days ago have all rotted. I was just guessing and not sure, so I didn't report it to your Majesty, but I made some precautions in advance." To Tang Ning's surprise, Emperor Chen didn't ask too much about this issue. He was silent for a moment and asked, "My son wants to rebel against me and kill me. Am I ridiculous?" "If you want to talk about ridiculous, the one on the grassland is ridiculous. His son not only rebelled, but also succeeded. It's not your Majesty's fault." Tang Ning lowered his head and said, "It's all because Prince Kong was confused by ambition. Fortunately, it didn't cause a big disaster." Emperor Chen didn't say anything else. After a long silence, he said, "Return to the palace." The court spent countless manpower, material resources, and financial resources to hold this sacrifice, but it was hastily ended halfway through. Although the rebellion has been settled, as an emperor, how could he continue the ceremony as if nothing had happened after experiencing such a thing? What happened at today's ceremony will definitely become a shame in his emperor's career. For the extremely face-conscious Emperor Chen, this is obviously something that cannot be accepted. When everyone returned to the capital, all the soldiers of the left and right West Gate guards were captured by the imperial guards and awaited punishment. Chi Yu, the general of the right West Gate guard, was missing. He had not appeared before the ceremony began today. In addition to him, all the senior generals of the two guards were captured, and what awaited them would be extremely severe punishment. The return of the group to the capital surprised and puzzled the people in the capital. According to the process of the ceremony, they should return to the capital after more than an hour, and it is absolutely impossible for them to return so early. And judging from the expressions of the accompanying officials, it seems that something extraordinary happened at this ceremony. Although no one has revealed any information, the truth will eventually come out. Soon after the emperor returned to the palace and all the officials went home, a piece of news that was enough to shock people came out from all the high gates. The ceremony did not go through to the end because King Kong colluded with the West Gate guards and intended to rebel at the ceremony. Your Majesty and the royal family almost fell into King Kang's hands. Although King Kang's rebellion was quickly suppressed by Zhou Xiaoyi, the ceremony naturally could not continue after such a thing happened. In the process, King Kong and all the left and right West Gate guards were captured, and the Zhang family actually followed King Kong in the rebellion. When hearing this news, countless people felt a little numb. King Kong rebelled and almost succeeded. Doesn't this mean that the capital today almost changed? The shock brought to the capital by this news was far greater than the rebellion in Jiangnan and the war in the northwest. After all, both of them were very far away from them, while this matter really happened around them. The price of rebellion is huge. Within an hour of Your Majesty returning to the palace, several imperial edicts were issued. King Kong rebelled and plotted treason, which is a great disrespect. From now on, he will be demoted to a commoner, imprisoned in the palace, and will not be free for life. Obviously, for King Kong, this punishment is still light, but from Your Majesty's point of view, King Kong is his son after all, and you can understand why he should be spared. At the same time, concubine Zhang was removed from the position of concubine Xian and sent to the cold palace. As the mother of King Kong, concubine Zhang could not escape the blame. The Ximenwei Zhang family rebelled and plotted treason, and all the people in charge, including the head of the Zhang family, were executed immediately. The rest of the Zhang family, the men, were sent to the army, and the women were sent to the slave class and sent to the music hall. At the same time, all the generals and guards involved in the left and right Ximenwei were exempted from the death penalty because of Your Majesty's golden words, but they could not escape the crime of living. They were all demoted to official slaves and dispersed to serve in various states. The aftermath of King Kang's rebellion lasted for several days and Tang Ning did not attend court for several days. Because Emperor Chen fell ill after the sacrifice ceremony. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 806. Emperor Chen fell ill, and Dr. Sun was invited to the palace to treat him. Tang Ning stood in the courtyard and saw Dr. Sun come in and asked, "How is it?" Dr. Sun said, "It's just a heart attack, nothing serious, just rest for a few days." It's normal for Emperor Chen to be angry and sick because his son rebelled at the ceremony he valued most and wanted to kill him. King Kong has been imprisoned in the palace, which is equivalent to being sentenced to life imprisonment. He will not die, but he will not live well. Prince Duan seemed to be completely excluded from the throne by Emperor Chen because of his spineless performance at the time. On the contrary, King Huai, who had always been ignored, was entrusted with an important task when Emperor Chen fell ill and was fully responsible for handling all matters in the court. After the ceremony, King Huai recovered. He was the one who dealt with and quelled the aftermath of the rebellion of Prince Kong. The Zhang family paid the price for the rebellion. The head of the Zhang family and several key figures in the family had lost their heads. From then on, the Ximenwei Zhang family was completely expelled from the capital. Concubine Zhang was banished to the Cold Palace, a place where you could never get out once you entered. Concubine Yang died of illness in the Cold Palace. Even the former retainers and advisors of Prince Kang's mansion were implicated, and the wanted order had been sent to various prefectures. All the soldiers of the left and right Ximenwei were implicated in the rebellion. Although they were able to save their lives, their identities were reduced to official slaves. The rest of their lives were just mining and repairing roads. The glory that once belonged to the imperial guards was gone forever. Xiaoju was meritorious in saving the emperor, and he was now promoted to the general of the Ximenwei. Emperor Chen transferred some people from the remaining 14 guards to the palace, and recruited soldiers within the capital to form a new Ximenwei. The disappearance of 10,000 imperial guards is not so easy to make up. Most of the troops of the state of Chen were deployed in the northwest. After this incident, the left and right West Gate guards were merged into the West Gate guards, and the 16 guards were reduced to 15 guards. Of course, this is only temporary. There are fewer wars in the northwest now. Emperor Chen has ordered to select 10,000 elite soldiers from the border troops to return to the capital to make up for the loss of the imperial guards. In this redress incident, Wu Lihao also made great contributions. He was originally the Lieutenant General of the Left Golden Feather Guard, and now he is the General of the Left Golden Feather Guard. As for Chen Zhou, who kicked out that crucial kick and performed outstandingly in front of Emperor Chen, he was also promoted from Lieutenant General to General, and became a well-known general in the capital. There has been a lot of turmoil in the court in the past 2 days. It is not an exaggeration to say that King Kang's rebellion this time is a reshuffle of the forces in the capital. Tang Ning himself did not receive any reward, but this was what he did deliberately. At his position, it was extremely difficult to move up one step or half a step, whether it was a civil or military position. The reward was difficult for him and for Emperor Chen. If he wanted any reward, it would be him, not Xiaoju, who led the Zhou Xiaoyi to quell the rebellion. On the 7th day after the ceremony, Tang Ning was finally summoned by Emperor Chen. The place where Emperor Chen met him this time was not the imperial study, but in his bedroom. He sat on the bed, and the whole person looked obviously more haggard than usual. When he saw Tang Ning coming in, he glanced at Zhao Man who was serving in front of the bed and said, "Man'er, go down first. I have something to say to him." After Emperor Chen fell ill, Zhao Man stayed in the palace and did not go home. She glanced at Tang Ning, and then slowly retreated. Tang Ning watched her leave, and when he looked away, the voice of Emperor Chen came over. "Are you sincere to Man'er?" This matter was no longer a secret to Emperor Chen. Tang Ning nodded and said, "I will protect her with my life. I am not a good father, not to Chen nor to Man'er. As long as Man'er really likes you, I don't want to care about your affairs." Emperor Chen looked outside and said, "You should treat her well in the future." This time, Tang Ning did not say "I obey your order," but said, "Your Majesty, don't worry." Emperor Chen sat up straight, took a long breath, and asked, "King Kong rebelled, and Prince Duan also disappointed me. In your opinion, who is more suitable to be the emperor, Prince Huai or Prince Run?" Emperor Chen asked this question very directly. Tang Ning hesitated for a moment and said, "Your Majesty." Emperor Chen waved his hand and said, "Don't fool me. I just want to hear your thoughts." Prince Huai. Tang Ning no longer hesitated and said, "From the current point of view, it is Prince Huai. His Majesty Prince Run is too young, and Prince Huai is outstanding. Even with Prince Duan and Prince Kong, I think, Prince Huai is the most suitable to be the emperor." "I think so too." Emperor Chen looked at him with a strange look in his eyes and said, "In terms of talent, he is only inferior to you. There are few people better than him in the whole court, but..." Emperor Chen paused and said, when I was young, I did some wrong things and hurt him. Although he was still young at that time, I am worried that he still feels the same thing." Tang Ning said, "Does His Royal Highness Prince Huai still feel the same? Your Majesty, can't you feel it after so many years?" "It is precisely because I can't feel it that I am worried." Emperor Chen sighed and said, "I can't see ambition in his eyes. Prince Duan, Prince Huai and even Prince Run have ambition in their eyes, but he doesn't have it." Before Tang Ning entered the palace, he never thought that the topic that Emperor Chen talked about with him would be so sensitive. He didn't know how to respond. After thinking about it, he said, "Maybe His Royal Highness Prince Huai thinks that his status and background are not as good as Prince Duan and Prince Kong, so he never thought about competing for anything." Emperor Chen shook his head and said, "As a prince, if he doesn't have the ambition to become an emperor, what else can he pretend to be?" Tang Ning chatted with Emperor Chen for a long time this time, and the topic was very sensitive. Emperor Chen should not talk to him about the inheritance of the throne, but should talk to Wang Xiang. However, after talking so much with Chen Huang, Tang Ning also discovered a misunderstanding that he, including many people in the court, had always had. Before King Kong rebelled and King Duan did not disappoint him, Emperor Chen never listed King Huai as his candidate for the crown prince. It did not seem to be because of his lack of identity and background. According to Chen Wang's speculation, he did something to offend King Huai in his early years. Although Tang Ning didn't know the specific thing, she thought it must be related to concubine Yang. This incident led to his suspicion of King Huai, and now that King Kong was defeated and King Duan was eliminated by Emperor Chen, if he was also suspicious of King Huai, this would undoubtedly be a good thing for Zhao Yuan. King Kang's rebellion this time not only eliminated himself, but also caught up with King Duan. Zhao Yuan was obviously one step closer to that position. When Tang Ning walked out of the palace gate, a figure slowly stepped into a certain palace. "Your Highness." The guard at the palace gate saluted immediately when he saw him. When King Huai stepped into the palace, a cold and damp atmosphere hit his face. This is the famous cold palace, used to imprison or incarcerate concubines who have fallen out of favor and committed crimes. The cold palace is just what outsiders call it. It was originally the dormitory of a certain concubine. It had the same name as Shuxia Palace and Changning Palace. However, because it was damp and cold all year round, it was gradually abandoned. Even the original palace was abandoned. The name was also lost and became what others call a cold palace. People living in such a cold and humid place will get sick soon. Therefore, few concubines who were relegated to the cold palace in history could live long. For example, concubine Yang more than 20 years ago, or concubine Zhang Xian who just moved in here. King Huai walked into the palace and saw a man standing in the courtyard in front of him. Concubine Zhang Xian glanced at him and asked, "What are you doing here?" King Huai placed a box of cakes on the cracked stone table in the courtyard and said, "Come and see the concubine Xian." Concubine Zhang Xian looked at him and said coldly, "Are you here to laugh at me?" King Huai shook his head and said, "It is concubine Hui who should laugh at you, not me." Thinking of concubine Tang Hui, concubine Zhang Xian's face darkened. King Huai looked at her and asked, "Do you feel unwilling to do so? You fought over and over again, but in the end you still couldn't win over her." Concubine Zhang Xian gritted her teeth and said, "That bitch. There's no need to be too angry." Concubine Xian. King Huai glanced at her and said calmly, "You won't be too lonely here, she will come to accompany you soon." Concubine Zhang Xian looked at him and said in shock, "What do you mean?" King Huai didn't speak again, turned around and walked out of the palace. Concubine Zhang Xian chased her out, and the palace door was closed from the outside. She lay on the door, slapped the door hard, and said loudly, open the door for me." He only shouted twice before his voice suddenly stopped. It wasn't because her hands hurt or she had no strength, it was just because she found that there were carvings on the wooden door in front of her. The carvings looked old, and many places had been weathered and decayed. There were 5 scratches in each place, and they were dark brown, like the marks of something dried. She couldn't help but feel chills all over her body when she took one look at them. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 807. King Kang's rebellion was the biggest event that happened in the capital recently. Although his rebellion was finally suppressed, many people shed blood and lost their heads. King Kong was deposed, and concubine Xian was sent to the cold palace, but in any case, the ceremony carefully prepared by His Majesty became a joke. After this incident was settled, some things that happened were beyond the expectations of many people. It was originally thought that King Kang's crime was a great benefit to Prince Duan, but who would have thought that after King Kong was imprisoned, His Majesty reused Prince Huai, and Prince Duan was further treated coldly. And the reason for this incident, after many inquiries, someone finally understood it. It turned out that at the ceremony that day, when King Kong rebelled and wanted to kill His Majesty and the princes, Prince Duan actually knelt down and begged for mercy without any bones, and even admitted that he was a pig and dog, and did not hesitate to imitate the sound of a dog barking, begging King Kong to spare his life. People can be without pride, but they must be proud. Prince Duan is not only without pride, he has no bones. If such a person becomes the Emperor of Chen, who can be assured? I am afraid that when the western regions or the grasslands invade, his first thought is not to resist, but to surrender. Once such a person sits on that position, the great Chen will sooner or later perish. In their view, even if the rebellious King Kong becomes the emperor, it is much better than the spineless Prince Duan. After recognizing the true face of Prince Duan, everyone is very curious. I wonder what the Tang family will think when they know that the Prince Duan, whom they have supported for so many years, is such a thing. In the Tang residence, Tang Hui and Tang Qi are also very upset. Concubine Tang Hui is from the Tang family, which is the mother's family of Prince Duan. If they do not support Prince Duan and support Prince Kong, I am afraid that Prince Kong himself will not believe it. So even if Prince Duan can no longer be supported, they can only bite the bullet. With the strength of the Tang family in those days, they resisted enemies as fierce as tigers and cruel as wolves, but they could not defend against accomplices as stupid as pigs. The actions of Prince Duan at the sacrifice ceremony had completely disappointed His Majesty, and he began to focus on Prince Huai and Prince Run. Through normal channels, Prince Duan could no longer sit in that position. Tang Zhao sat in the courtyard, holding a book in his hand, and sighed, "Say he is a pig, but he has to prove that he is a dog. What is the difference between a pig and a dog? Anyway, they are all beasts. How can His Majesty let beasts sit on the throne?" "Stop talking nonsense." Tang Qi glanced at him and said, "Didn't you say you had a way? Come on, what else do you have?" Tang Zhao stood up and said, "I'll go out for a walk and sort it out. We'll talk about this matter tonight." Watching Tang Zhao walk out, Tang Qi's face eased slightly and said, "Prince Kong was imprisoned, and concubine Zhang was banished to the cold palace. After all, we still got rid of them first. In fact, the incident at the sacrifice to heaven this time and Prince Duan was abandoned did not cause much fluctuation in their hearts. After all, before this, the Tang family had prepared for Prince Duan to be abandoned and tried their best to deal with Prince Kong. Unexpectedly, they did everything they could to not cause much loss to Prince Kong and the Zhang family. This time, the actions of Prince Kong and the Zhang family put themselves in an irreversible situation. The Tang family can be said to have picked up a big bargain for nothing. Everyone thought that Prince Duan had faded out of the center of power, but they didn't know that the Tang family had been so powerful in Chen state for so many years, How could they not have a little backhand? The two talked for a while, and then saw Tang Zhao coming in from outside again. Tang Qi glanced at him and asked, "Aren't you going out?" "I just learned something." Tang Zhao looked at them and said, "Tang Ning has been appointed as Prime Minister." Hearing this, Tang Hui clenched his fists, and his expression was complicated. Scholars often use passing the imperial examinations, entering the court, and being appointed as a marquis as a prime minister as a motivation to spur themselves on. In today's era, it is impossible to be appointed as a marquis, unless they can make great contributions like Ding Guoho. If the road to being a marquis is not feasible, then they can only be appointed as a prime minister. But all the scholars in the world want to be prime ministers, but there are only two prime ministers. In order to maintain the stability of the court, the prime minister of Chen state will not be changed easily, unless he commits suicide like Feng Xiang. Ordinary people want to sit in the position of prime minister, unless they retire at old age, or simply wait until they die in the position of prime minister. There has never been a prime minister who just passed the age of 20. Now there is one. Your Majesty just issued an edict today, conferring Dingguo Tang Ning as the right prime minister of the current dynasty. The edict has been posted all over the capital and will be announced to the world soon. Before this, the position of right prime minister was vacant. Although Zhou Shangshu, the former minister of personnel, had sat in this position for half a year, everyone knew that His Majesty had left this position for one person. It was just because he was too young and His Majesty did not want everyone to have objections, so he temporarily appointed him as the left chancellor of the Ministry of Shangshu. However, the officials of the Ministry of Shangshu knew that although Tang Ning's official position was only the left chancellor of the Ministry of Shangshu, he actually exercised the power of the right prime minister. Now, His Majesty finally gave him this title, and there was no one in the court who objected. Everyone knew that it was Tang Ning who put down the rebellion of King Kong a few days ago. His Majesty could not have rewarded a minor figure and not rewarded him, the greatest contributor. Originally thought that he was in a high position and His Majesty had nothing to reward, but unexpectedly, His Majesty made this decision that shocked the capital after only a few days. The Marquis of Dingguo, the right Chancellor of the DPRK, and the General of the Imperial Guard, he has reached the pinnacle of both civil and military positions and titles. The name Tang Ning has become a legend in the Chen Kingdom a long time ago. Tang Mansion. Tang Ning was also caught off guard by this imperial edict. When Chen Huang chatted with him yesterday, he didn't mention this matter at all. But if he had decided at that time, the topics we talked about with him yesterday would be nothing. The edict was issued this morning. In the afternoon, the Tang family had already received dozens of guests who came to congratulate them. Later, Tang Ning couldn't take care of it anymore, so she simply told the concierge that if anyone came, tell them that he was not here and ask them to put down their gifts. That's it. In the evening, Xiaoju walked in with Lu Ya holding her belly, looked at Tang Ning from a distance, and said, "Congratulations, Your Excellency." After becoming a general, Xiaoju walked straighter and straighter. Tang Ning looked at him and said, "Same joy, General Xiao." This time King Kong rebelled. Zhou Xiaoyi was obviously the biggest winner. Tang Ning was granted the title of Prime Minister, Xiaoju finally became a general, Chen Zhou also became a general, and the other generals were promoted to one rank. This achievement will greatly help their future promotions. Lu Ya went to the backyard to find Tang Yao Yao. Xiaoju sat opposite Tang Ning and said, "This time, King Run is more stable. If the Xiao family intends to help King Run, then he is indeed stable." The two ministers on the left and right of the dynasty, and the 6 ministries are almost his back garden. Coupled with the imperial guards under direct or indirect control, he can even make Emperor Chen abdicate now. Xiaoju saw his expression was different and asked, "What are you worried about?" Tang Ning said, "There is also King Hui." King Kong rebelled, and King Huai benefited a lot. He almost became Emperor Chen's spokesperson in the court. If Emperor Chen finally changed his mind and wanted to pass the throne to King Huai, Zhao Yuan might have to rebel in order to sit on that throne. Location. This is not what Tang Ning wants, nor is it what Zhao Yuan wants. King Huai, Xiao Ju shook his head and said, King Huai is the same as you. He can't even give birth to a son. Your Majesty will pass the throne to him. Who will he pass the throne to in the future? Why don't you think about it? Tang Yao Yao helped Lu Ya out. The latter looked at Xiao Ju and asked, what are you talking about the throne? Nothing. Xiao Ju shook his head and said, we said that King Kong rebelled, and he has no hope of inheriting the throne this time. Does this need to be said? Lu Ya glanced at him and said, by the way, I want to go back to the Lu family to live for a while. I miss my mother. Go back to the Lu family. Xiao Ju stood up suddenly, a hint of joy appeared on his face, and then immediately showed a reluctant expression and asked, how long do you plan to go back? The pregnant Lu Ya lived up to her reputation as a witch. These days, she was tortured to the point of going crazy. When she suddenly heard the good news, she couldn't suppress the joy in her heart. Lu Ya said, 10 days and a half months. Ah, it's been so long, haha. Xiao Ju pinched his thigh violently, stopped laughing, sighed, and said, then I won't be able to see you for half a month. You can go back with her. Tang Ning looked at Xiao Ju and said, when a woman is pregnant, it will be good for the growth of the fetus if her husband is by her side. The expression on Xiao Ju's face was stunned. She winked at him and asked, really? Really? Tang Ning looked at him and said, don't forget, I'm also a doctor. What's wrong with your eyes? You're blinking. Do you want me to take a look? Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 808. Chapter 803 of the main volume of Ruyi Little Man, Blood Debt Repaid with Blood. Update 14/23. After a woman is pregnant, her temper will be a little weird. This is normal. Lu Ya may have stayed in the Xiao family for a long time and wanted to go back to her parents' home for a while. As a husband, it is normal for Xiao Ju to go back and stay with her. A gentleman's revenge is never too late. Tang Ning is not a gentleman. He usually avenges himself on the spot. If he can't do it on the spot, he won't do it overnight. Xiao Ju was different. He could only look at Tang Ning with gritted teeth. When Lu Ya looked at her, a smile immediately filled his face. Lu Ya frowned at him and asked, are you unwilling? How can? Xiao Ju looked at Tang Ning and gritted his teeth, of course the child is the most important thing. Thank you for reminding me. Tang Ning said, we are all friends, so you're welcome. The two sat for a while, and then Xiao Ju helped Lu Ya leave. Tang Yao Yao looked at the backs of them leaving and said, he just laughed secretly. He just wants Sister Lu to go back. Are you men like this? Are you tired of deceiving women? Of course not. Tang Ning looked at her and said with a smile, I will lie to you for the rest of my life, and I won't be bothered for the rest of my life. Seeing Tang Yajiao's slightly red face, Tang Ning secretly sighed in her heart, there are straight men and there are straight women. Xiao Ju and Lu Ya have been together for a long time, and they are a good match. Tang Yaojing seems to be as violent as Lu Ya, but she can be soft or strong. When a man encounters such a woman, he usually has no resistance. After having nothing to do in the evening, Tang Ning and Tang Yao Yao went out to visit the night market. The night in the capital was still very lively before the curfew. Even though a coup that shocked the capital had just occurred a few days ago, the lives of the people changed again after a few days. Calmness returned, as if nothing had happened. A tea house somewhere in Beijing. Tang Zhao was sitting in the elegant pavilion, and there was a man sitting opposite him. The man was wearing a cloak, covering his face tightly. Prince Duan is completely out of luck this time. Tang Zhao looked at him and asked, did your master say what to do? King Kong said something when he rebelled. A voice came from under the cloak. He said that what he wants cannot rely on others' charity, but must be obtained by himself. Although he failed in the rebellion, this sentence said quite right. You also know that he failed. Tang Zhao shook his head and said, do you think the throne is just cabbage and you can take it whenever you want? The man took out a box from his arms and placed it on the table. Tang Zhao opened it and took a look and saw that it was filled with a white powder. He pinched a handful with his fingers and was about to put it under his nose to smell it. The man said, if I were you, I wouldn't do this. Tang Zhao put it back into the box, closed the box, and asked, what is this? A kind of incense. The man glanced at him and said, now His Majesty is often disturbed by nightmares and needs to light incense in the palace to fall asleep. Every time, take a small amount of this incense and put it in the incense burner. In less than half a year, he should consider who to pass the position to. Tang Zhao asked, are you sure the imperial doctor won't find out? The man said, this is a strange fragrance from his hu. It is colorless and odorless. It is not harmful when used in moderation. However, if you smell it for several hours every day, your body will become weaker and weaker. Within 3 months it can't be found out, we will just think that it is caused by fatigue. Tang Zhao put the box away and said, what a good thing. I gave you the things. Whether you can use them or not depends on your own abilities. The man stood up, said lightly, and left. Tang Zhao looked at him and asked, what do you want? The man said, when King Duan sits on the throne, we want power, money, glory, and wealth. Tang Zhao smiled and said, it's easy to talk about. A quarter of an hour after Tang Zhao left the tea house, the man in the cloak appeared at the door of the tea house again. He went up to the second floor of the tea house, knocked on the door of a private room, pushed the door open, took off his cloak, bowed to the figure sitting at the table, and said, Your Highness, the things have been given to them. Late at night, Tang Chi opened the box on the table, pinched the white powder inside, put it under his nose, smelled it, and asked, What is this? Tang Zhao said, Poison. Tang Chi's expression changed drastically, and he immediately put his finger into the tea, stirred it, and said angrily, Why didn't you tell me earlier? Tang Zayadao, you didn't even ask. Tang Chi was about to get angry when Tang Hui reached out to stop him and asked, Where did you get this thing? Tang Zayadao, someone gave it to me. Tang Hui asked, What do they want? Tang Zayadao, silver, women, power, glory, and wealth. Royal palace, a certain palace in the harem. Concubine Tang Hui held a wooden box in her hand and said, A woman with silver is nothing, and wealth is nothing. What I'm afraid of is that they have no requirements. She handed the box to a palace maid in the palace and asked, Do you know what to do? The palace maid's face turned pale, she pursed her lips and said, I know. Tang Ning discovered that after he became the right chancellor, he actually did the same job as before. Except that the officials of the Shangshu province treated him with more respect, there was no big difference. Another point that made him very satisfied was that from now on, no one in Shangshu province could control when he went to Yamen and Yamen. Like Wang Xiang, he could come when he wanted, not come if he didn't want to, and take a few days off if he wanted. Just take a few days off. After processing the last letter of the day, and with half an hour left before leaving the office, Tang Ning slipped out of Shangshu province and prepared to go back to make Tang Yao Yao's favorite assorted casserole. Master Tang, stay. A familiar voice came from behind. Tang Ning turned her head and saw King Hui walking out of the Shangshu Yamen and slowly walking towards him. Tang Ning looked at him and asked, His Royal Highness, is there anything else? King Hui said, I have a question that I have always wanted to ask Mr. Tang. Tang Ning's eyes stayed on him, and King Hui asked again, Do you hate the Tang family for treating you like this? Tang Ning asked in surprise, Why does your highness ask this? King Hui smiled and said, I'm just curious. Mr. Tang has a rough life, but I can't see any hatred in your eyes. Hate is out of the question. Tang Ning shook her head and said, the world is very beautiful, with spring breeze, summer cicadas, autumn wind, and winter snow, but my heart can't contain these beautiful things, so why should I pretend to hate it? King Huai said, since you don't hate us, why did you let the Tang family fall into such a situation? Because it makes me happy, Tang Ning said. Zi once said, repay kindness with kindness and repay grievance with straightness. We must listen to Zi's words and retaliate when there is hatred and repay resentment when there is grievance, but this does not mean that we have to live in this world. Hatred inside. Are you satisfied that the Tang family has fallen into the current situation? King Huai looked at him and asked, Tang Huai and Tang Qi wanted you to die back then. You don't want to kill them. Murder is against the law. Tang Ning looked at him, shook her head and said, I am a law-abiding person. I am civilized and polite, keep my core values in mind, firmly support the court and policies, and strive to establish a good reputation for the people of the capital and the officials of the DPRK and China. Set a correct example. King Huai cupped his hands and said, Master Tang's realm is so high that I cannot reach it. Tang Ning cupped her hands and returned the greeting, thank you for your reward. King Huai turned around and left, took 2 steps, stopped again, and asked, what if they kill your parents and harm your relatives? Tang Ning smiled and said, I also said something. King Huai asked, which sentence? Tang Ning said, blood debt must be paid with blood. King Huai turned around and looked at him for a long time. He couldn't help but laugh and asked, may I ask Master Tang, which prince is this from? Tang Ning thought for a while and said, I. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 809. A gentleman's revenge is never too late. The villain takes revenge from morning to night. Tang Ning is not a villain, but he does not claim to be a gentleman. He will not offend others unless they offend him. His code of conduct is to tear down my windows and demolish other people's houses. He was profoundly practicing what Zi once said. However, although there is hatred to be avenged, it is undeniable that besides hatred, there are many beautiful people and things in the world. Such as Zhong Yi, such as Su Ru, such as Tang Yao Yao, Li Tianlan, Su Mei, Zhao Man. Instead of being tormented by hatred, wouldn't it be nice to do happy things with the people you like and get revenge at the same time? King Huai looked at him and asked, I said this before. Tang Ning thought for a while and said, maybe it will be over. Tang Yao Yao was still waiting for him at home. He didn't have time to talk philosophy with King Huai here. Tang Ning looked at him and said, I'm going back first. See you tomorrow. King Huai shook his head and smiled. He was about to go back to the office, but as if he thought of something, he turned around and asked, what are core values? Tang Ning waved back, patriotic, dedicated, honest, friendly. It is right for officials like Chen Guo, who have been tortured by feudalism, to receive more influence from the core socialist values. In the court, there are intrigues, fights, and killings. The ministers rebel against the king, and the sons rebel against Lao Tzu. It is not friendly at all, let alone the rule of law. Emperor Chen experienced King Kang's rebellion this time, and seemed to be on guard. Among the imperial guards, he replaced all the generals who were related to King Kong, King Duan, and even King Fu, and asked people to draw up a decree for the changes of the imperial guards. From then on, the commander of the 16 guards will officials are not allowed to serve more than 1 year in order to prevent similar incidents from happening again. Tang Ning returned home, and as soon as she walked in the door, she heard a woman's voice coming from inside. Ever since Ziru and Xiao left with most of the maids in the house has not been so lively for a long time. Tang Ning stepped into the inner courtyard and saw Zhong Yi and Su Ru standing in the courtyard, with the maids surrounding them, chattering. Qing Er took Tang Yao Yao's arm and asked, Sister Yao Yao, We heard on the road that my uncle has been named Prime Minister, is it true? We also heard that King Kong rebelled. I've only been away from Beijing for a few days, so why have so many things happened? Qing glanced in the direction of the door, then ran over quickly and said happily, my uncle is back. After a while, Tang Ning held Zhongyi and Su Ru's hands and asked, why are you back so early? Zhongyi looked at him, then at Tang Yaoyao, and asked, don't you want us to come back? How is that possible? Tang Ning put their hands together, held them gently, and said, if you don't come back in a few days, I will go to Lingzhou to find you. Zhongyi focused his eyes on Tang Yaoyao, smiled slightly, and asked, really? When Tang Yaoyao saw her strange look, her face turned red and she lowered her head quietly. From the bottom of her heart, she naturally hoped to live a life of two with Tang Ning, but her conscience did not allow her to think so. She quickly regained her composure, held Zhongyi's hand, and said, this is the time when you are not in the capital. A lot of things happened during the day, let me tell you. Zhongyi was pulled aside by Tang Yaoyao. Tang Ning was sitting in the pavilion. Su Ru leaned on his shoulder, raised her head, and said with a smile in her beautiful eyes, congratulations, brother Ning, you always said when I was a child, becoming a prince and becoming a prime minister is your biggest dream. Tang Ning stroked her hair and said with a smile, my biggest dream is to be with you all my life. King Huai asked him today if he had any hatred in his heart, and Tang Ning's answer was negative. This is because there are too many people and things in his heart, and he can't even hold them all in his heart. How can he have room to hold those dark things? He wrote a letter to Wang Yanyan and told her that within a year, he would go to the grassland to find her. Now that King Kang's rebellion has failed, King Duan has also faded out of Emperor Chen's sight. Zhao Yuan is almost the prince recognized by Emperor Chen, and with so many strong backgrounds behind him, it is only a matter of time before he steps into the East Palace. Although Lanlan's matter was still unresolved and he would have to go to Chu State by then, that would be after they left the capital. Before that, he just had to wait for Su Mei to come back. A breakup was better than a wedding. After being separated from Sura's Hong'ai for a few days, Tang Ning spent an unforgettable night and went to the Yamen on the afternoon of the next day. When he returned to Shangshu Yamen, he happened to receive an order from the palace. Emperor Chen ordered him and King Huai to search Prince Kang's mansion and execute it immediately. Tang Ning looked around, looked at Shangshu Yushan, and asked, where is King Huai? Shangshu Yushan shook his head and said, Your Highness has not come this morning. Searching the palace cannot be done by one person. In order to avoid suspicion, at least two people should be responsible. On the way to Prince Kang's mansion, she happened to pass by Prince Huai's mansion, and Tang Ning planned to go directly to the prince's mansion to find him. At this time, in Prince Huai's palace, Prince Huai was playing chess leisurely. The person opposite looked up at him and said in surprise, You seem to be different from before. King Huai smiled and asked, What's the difference? The man shook his head and said, It's just a feeling, the specifics, I can't tell. He looked at the chessboard in front of him and said, And your chess skills seem to be better than before. King Huai said, With less worries and less thoughts in my heart, I can play chess well. The man looked up at him and asked in surprise, Have you let it go? If you haven't picked it up, how can you put it down? King Huai smiled and said, Yesterday I asked Mr. Tang a question. The man asked, What's the problem? King Huai said, What would he do if he were me? The man asked, What did he say? King Huai said, He said that Zi once said that blood debts must be paid with blood. He must listen to Zi's words. Fart, the man snorted and said, Who has ever said this before? King Huai said, I. The man looked at him, and after being stunned for a moment, he suddenly lifted the chessboard and said angrily, You are treasonous. King Huai looked at the chess pieces on the ground, then looked up at him and asked, If it's just 1,000 taels of silver, Why does Uncle Wang need it? How much can 1,000 taels of silver buy? I am not as rich as you. Prince Fu waved his sleeves and said, when you have a prodigal daughter in the future, you can say this to me again. As soon as he finished speaking, a servant knocked on the door, walked in, and said, Your Highness, Mr. Tang is here to visit. King Huai came out with King Fu. Every time Tang Ning saw King Fu, she would look at him twice. After all, such a fat prince with a big belly could actually give birth to a daughter as beautiful as Princess Anyang. It seems that Princess Fu's genes must be very strong. Tang Ning explained her purpose, and King Huai nodded and said, in that case, let's go there now. Prince Fu returned to the princess's mansion, and Tang Ning and Prince Huai came to Prince Kang's mansion, where people from the Ministry of Industry and the Ministry of Household Affairs were already waiting. Tang Ning looked at the doctor from the Ministry of Industry and said, let's get started. All the treasures and jewelry in Prince Kang's palace, including this palace, will be rushed back to the treasury. The clerks from the Ministry of Industry are moving things outside one by one, while the officials from the Ministry of Household are registering them. When Tang Ning and Prince Huai inspected the palace, they only followed the prescribed procedures. These minor officials would be searched when they left the palace, so it was unlikely that they would enrich themselves. Two policemen moved a bookcase from a certain yard and accidentally bumped it on the steps. The bookcase fell to the ground and the books inside were scattered all over the floor. A minor official from the Ministry of Industry frowned and said, be careful, if you break something, you can't afford to pay for it. The two officers were busy cleaning up. At this moment, a figure came over and said loudly, wait a minute. Tang Ning picked up a booklet from the ground, flipped through it, looked at the official from the Ministry of Works, and asked, who lives in this courtyard? You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 810. I have met your right minister. When the clerk saw Tang Ning, he bowed respectfully, then shook his head and said, I don't know. Tang Ning looked at the booklet in her hand with an expression of disbelief on her face. This person reminded him once when Aina was involved in women's martial arts. He went to the grassland, and when Princess Yi Yang was causing trouble in Beijing, this man also sent a letter home. The day before King Kong rebelled, this person sent a letter to remind him. If it hadn't been for that letter, King Kang's rebellion would have probably succeeded, and the situation in the capital would not be as stable as it is now. Tang Ning didn't know who did all this secretly. His only impression of this person was that his handwriting was ugly. Ugliness is also a characteristic. The imperial examination has extremely high requirements for handwriting, so scholars all have good handwriting. Not to mention how valuable calligraphy is, at least what they write is neat. This person's handwriting was like a dog crawling, and it was like a handful of scattered straw. Tang Ning recognized it at a glance. But what surprised him was that the person who had reminded him many times in the past few days, and even revealed to him such things as Prince Kang's rebellion, actually came from Prince Kang's house. A young man appeared in Prince Kang's mansion. This was something he never expected. King Huai came over and asked, have you discovered anything? Nothing. Tang Ning smiled and put the book away. King Huai noticed his actions, but didn't say much, turned around and walked away. Before King Kang's rebellion, he had almost nothing, and not many things were found in Prince Kang's mansion. Half an hour later, the household clerks had finished counting, and Tang Ning and King Huai left Prince Kang's mansion. King Huai went back to the palace directly, but Tang Ning did not go home, nor did she go back to Shangshu province. Instead, she went to the Ministry of Punishment. After King Kong rebelled, all the servants of Prince Kang's palace were captured and temporarily detained in the prison of the Ministry of Punishment. Tang Ning borrowed paper and pen from Song Yi, the minister of the Ministry of Justice, and drew a sketch of Prince Kang's mansion. When he came to the prison of the Ministry of Justice, he looked at a servant of the prince's mansion and asked, "Who lives in this courtyard of the prince's mansion?" The servant looked at him and said, "Yes, it's Mr. Su. It's him." A strange color flashed across Tang Ning's eyes, and the figure of a middle-aged man appeared in her mind. When King Kong was still a prince, he had countless advisors around him, and Mr. Su was one of them. Tang Ning once investigated and found that the reason why King Kong was able to compete with King Duan, who had the support of the Tang family, was that Mr. Su had the greatest contribution. After King Kong was deprived of his throne, all the counselors around him dispersed, and only Mr. Su remained by his side. Tang Ning originally thought that he was a staunch supporter of King Kong and wanted to help King Kong overturn the situation, but she didn't expect that he wanted King Kong to overturn the situation. But if his goal is only King Kong, the first two reminders he made to himself are unexplainable. Tang Ning asked several more people in Prince Kang's palace to confirm that the courtyard belonged to Mr. Su, and then walked out of the prison of the criminal department. Song Yi came over and asked, "What did Tang Xiang gain?" Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "Does Mr. Song know about Mr. Su?" Song Yi nodded and said, "This man is King Kang's #1 advisor. We suspect that King Kong is plotting a rebellion, and he is the one who is behind the plan. It's just that when the Ministry of Punishment went to the palace to arrest people, they did not see this person. Now he is arrested at sea. Documents have been sent to various state capitals, and as long as he is in Chen State, he will not be able to escape." When Tang Ning walked out of the criminal department and returned home, she still had no idea what Su was doing. He helped King Kong to rebel, but betrayed him at a critical moment. I wonder how King Kong would feel if he knew about this. He stopped thinking about the things he couldn't figure out. He looked at Song Yi and said, "There's nothing else going on. I'll go back first. I'll trouble Mr. Song." Song Yi cupped his hands and said, "Tang Xiang, walk slowly." Tang Ning walked into the courtyard, seemed to think of something, paused, and turned back. Song Yi looked at him and asked, "What else does Prime Minister Tang have to do?" Tang Ning looked at him and said, "I want to check the files of a case. I hope Mr. Song can make it easier." "You're welcome, Prime Minister Tang." Song Yi smiled and said, "What case is it? I'll have someone look for it." Tang Ning looked at him and said, "How were Tang Yu and his wife found 20 years ago? In the vast country of Chen, trying to find two people is like looking for a needle in a haystack. Without official intervention, it is simply impossible. And if it is an official wanted person, there will definitely be traces left here in the Ministry of Punishments." Song Yi looked at him and said, "I'm afraid it's difficult to investigate things that happened more than 20 years ago. At that time, I was not the minister of the Ministry of Justice. But don't worry, Mr. Tang, I will have people look for it in a moment. If I find it, I will send it to you immediately. Come to the house." Tang Ning cupped her hands and said, "Thank you, Mr. Song. It should be." What happened back then had something to do with him, and Tang Ning didn't want to continue to be so confused. After asking Song Yi to take care of this matter, he went home directly. There was a carriage parked in front of the Tang mansion. Tang Ning had seen it many times. This was Princess Anyang's carriage. It should be Tang Shui's arrival. Tang Ning came to the backyard and saw the two of them. Princess Anyang glanced at him from afar and said in a strange tone, "The Prime Minister of Tang is here. Anyang is not welcoming you from afar. Don't blame the Prime Minister." This woman's grudge was beyond Tang Ning's expectation. Tang Ning was too lazy to pay attention to her. She walked to Tang Shui, looked back and asked, "Is she inconvenienced these days?" Tang Ning asked in confusion, "What's the inconvenience?" As a woman, there are always a few days that are inconvenient. Tang Ning glanced at Princess Anyang and said, "It's just those days when the mood becomes impetuous and the temper becomes bad." Tang Shui's face turned red, he glanced at him and said, "You're out of shape." Tang Ning waved her hand and stopped worrying about the matter. She looked at her and asked, "Have you met Princess Fu?" Tang Shui rolled his eyes at him and said, "Of course I've seen it before." Tang Ning asked, "Is Princess Fu beautiful?" Tang Shui glanced at him and asked, "Why do you ask?" "I'm just curious." Tang Ning finally asked her doubts and said, "Prince Fu looks like that, but the daughter he gave birth to looks like a dog. She must have perfectly inherited Princess Fu's advantages." Tang Shui shook his head and said, "Prince Fu was not like this when he was young. It is said that when he was young, he was also a famous handsome man in the capital." "Beautiful man, him?" Tang Ning looked stunned, even more shocked than when she learned that Mr. Su had betrayed Prince Kong. The title famous handsome man in the capital is not something that just anyone can get. No one calls him that, so why would it be used to describe King Fu? No matter how Tang Ning imagined it, she could not connect King Fu with these three words. "It's true. You can find out if you ask around," Tang Shui said. "It's just what happened later that made him what he is now." "What's going on?" Tang Ning looked at her, the fire of gossip burning in her chest. Tang Shui shook his head and said, "I don't know, that happened more than 20 years ago, and I heard about it accidentally." Tang Ning originally wanted to ask a few more questions, but a maid asked them to come over for dinner. The kitchen in this small courtyard is independent, and there are only 4 of them eating. Normally, Tang Ning and Tang Yu are the majority. Sometimes Zhou Yisu Ru and the others will come to accompany them. Tang Ning was sitting at the table. She casually glanced at Princess Anyang's wrist and asked in surprise, "Where did your bracelet come from?" Princess Anyang glanced at him and said, "Auntie gave it to me, can you take care of it?" Tang Ning looked at Tang Yu and asked, "Mom, why did you give her the bracelet?" Tang Yu smiled and said, "If it weren't for the princess' help, I wouldn't be able to see you. I should thank her." "Listen." Princess Anyang glanced at him and said, "Auntie is not like some people who repay kindness with hatred. You can't wear this bracelet randomly." Tang Ning originally wanted to say something, but in the end she just waved her hand and said, "Just give it to me." Princess Anyang looked at him and said angrily, "What kind of attitude do you have? Shui'er can wear it, why can't I wear it?" Tang Ning did not continue the topic, pointed to the lotus root on the table and said, "You eat lotus root?" Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 811. Today's lotus root obviously had too much vinegar in it. Tang Ning and the other 2 did not touch it much. The whole plate of lotus root was eaten up by Princess Anyang. Ugly people should eat more lotus root. Although Princess Anyang was not ugly, she also needed to eat more. Lotus root is cold in nature and has the effect of clearing heat and relieving irritability. It is obvious that Princess Anyang needs to relieve her heat. She may not be so angry next time she sees him. After dinner, Tang Shui and Princess Anyang stayed for a while and then left. Tang Ning thought of something and looked at Tang Yu and asked, "Mom, there is a rumor that Prince Fu was a famous handsome man in the capital when he was young. Is it true?" "This is not a rumor." Tang Yu shook her head and said, "When Prince Fu was young, he was known as the most beautiful man in the capital. At that time, even if he was a playboy, many women from wealthy families wanted to marry him." Tang Ning was surprised and said, "Prince Fu, a playboy?" Compared to the fact that Prince Fu was the most beautiful man in the capital, Tang Ning felt that the latter was more unbelievable. After all, time feeds pigs. The dream man of the young girl in the past also got fat in middle age. Prince Fu is not the only one who regards appearance as dirt. Thousands of years later, there is another man named Li on the other side of the Pacific Ocean. However, appearance can change easily, but nature cannot. Tang Ning has seen honest people who have fallen, but rarely seen a prodigal who has turned back. Everyone in the capital knows that Marquis Dingguo and Prince Huai love their wives, and Prince Fu is afraid of his wife. Tang Ning thought that Prince Fu's character was innate, but he didn't expect that he had such a past. What did the prodigal who used to be romantic experience to become a henpecked husband who only loves one person? Why did Prince Fu turn back later, and why did he change from the most beautiful man in the capital to a greasy uncle like today? Tang Yu didn't know, and Tang Ning had no way of knowing. The reason why he was curious about Prince Fu was certainly not because of Princess Anyang or any other reason, but Prince Fu gave him a very strange feeling. On the day when Prince Kong rebelled, the powerful officials were in a panic, Prince Duan was scared to death, and even Emperor Chen was scared to death. Only Prince Fu remained calm from beginning to end, as if he was not worried at all that Prince Kong would kill him if he succeeded in the rebellion. Either he was not afraid of death at all, or he knew that Prince Kong would not succeed. As for which reason, Tang Ning did not know. If it was the former, Tang Ning respected him as a fat man with backbone. If it was the latter, where did his confidence come from? His curiosity about Prince Fu ended here, because apart from that, he had to be busy with other things. Only one day later, Song Yi, the Minister of Justice, sent a bag of files about what happened that year. There was a wanted order in the file, and the picture was of Tang Yu when she was young. This was enough to prove that Emperor Chen was involved in the events of that year. Without his permission, the Tang family would not have the ability to post wanted orders all over the Chen kingdom. There should be 2 wanted orders, but the Ministry of Justice only kept 1. I don't know if it was due to the negligence of the Ministry of Justice or other reasons, which made Tang Ning a little disappointed. He actually wanted to see what his father in this world looked like. Coincidence may happen once, and it may happen again. This is something he has been looking forward to for a long time. He hopes that the regrets and deficiencies of another world can be fulfilled in this world. However, it only wrote the mother, but there was no information about that person. This is obviously abnormal. The Tang family deliberately did it to cover up the shame. In addition, the other details are written in detail on this file. After the 2 of them eloped, the court issued a arrest warrant. It took a long time to find them in Lingzhou and bring the young lady of the Tang family back, but the Jiangnan scholar was not mentioned. Tang Shui was brought back at that time. When Tang Ning checked the file, he also found something he didn't know before. They didn't elope with 2 people, but with the help of some people, they could escape all the way from the capital to Lingzhou. The identities of those people were also revealed. They were the envoys sent by Zioan to the state of Chen. At that time, the relationship between Zioan and the state of Chen was not so tense. To be precise, the western regions were subject to the state of Chen. It was not mentioned why the western regions' envoys helped them, and Tang Ning could not guess it, but from the words between the lines of these files, the Zioan envoys at that time must have had a very unpleasant thing with the Chen government or the Tang family. After that, Zioan continued to pay tribute to the state of Chen every year, but 2 or 3 years ago, it suddenly expanded its power and incorporated 1/3 of the western regions into its territory. At the same time, it completely turned against the state of Chen and has now become the #1 enemy of the state of Chen. Tang Ning did not know whether the current situation between the state of Chen and Zioan was related to this incident, but one thing was certain, Tang Shui did have western regions ancestry. Judging from her appearance, one of her parents should be Han Chinese and the other from Zioan. This matter can be answered from his mother, but Tang Ning rarely asks her about what happened in the past, in order to prevent her from thinking about those not so good memories. Emperor Chen was also involved in the past. Tang Ning could understand his actions from his perspective, but he still felt uncomfortable. It was not until he thought of Zhao Man that he suppressed some of his emotions. In the palace, Emperor Chen did not read the memorials in the imperial study, but returned to the bedroom. It was extremely difficult for him to fall asleep at night, and he was haunted by nightmares every night, so he would take naps during the day to replenish his energy. When he slept, he had to light soothing incense. A palace maid slowly walked in and lit the incense burner. No one noticed that when she lit the incense burner, a pinch of white powder between her fingers fell gently into the incense burner. The capital, above the streets. Tang Shui and Princess Anyang did not ride in the carriage, but walked side by side. Princess Anyang looked thoughtful. After a moment, she turned to look at Tang Shui and asked, "Did he just call me ugly?" Tang Shui asked, "When?" "He asked me to eat lotus root." Princess Anyang said, "Eat lotus root, eat lotus root." Eating lotus root together means being ugly. Was he just hinting that I was ugly? How is it possible? Tang Shui shook his head and said, "Stop thinking nonsense. This must be what he means." Princess Anyang gritted her teeth and said, "He'd better pray that he doesn't fall into my hands, otherwise I will make him know how powerful Anyang." Tang Shui shook his head helplessly and changed the subject. "I plan to go to the western regions next year." Princess Anyang looked at her and asked in surprise, "Why are you going to the western regions?" Tang Shuidao, "Let's take a walk and take a look. My sister-in-law said that my hometown is in the western regions. I want to see what it's like there." Princess Anyang said, "I heard that the climate there is hot and the wind and sand are strong. Do you really want to go?" Tang Shui looked at her and asked, "Do you want to go with me? What's the point of always being in the capital?" "I'm not going." Princess Anyang shook her head decisively and said, "I don't want to be turned into a yellow-faced woman by the wind and sand there." While the two were walking down the street chatting, an angry shout came from the front. "Speak, are you mute? If you don't speak, how will the guests know if you are mute? You dare to stare at me? If you still can't sell it today, I will dig out your eyes and make you beggar on the street." Tang Shui and Princess Anyang looked up and saw more than 10 figures somewhere on the street corner. One of them was holding a whip and was beating the others. Those squatting on the ground and being whipped had tall noses and deep facial features, which looked different from those of Chen Qiuren. The man cursed, raised his whip, and was about to whip it when he noticed a resistance coming from behind. He turned his head and found that the head of the whip was held in the hand of a young woman.